Just before I go on, I acknowledge that most of the material in this talk I owe to my colleague Soren So, who's a drilling engineer who is chiefly responsible for the technology that I'm about to talk to you about. I'm a geologist. My role in this was to provide the specs on what the rig should look like and to try and help them to ensure that we were getting a good sample from this technology. So why coiled tube drilling for mineral exploration? Coiled tube drilling has actually been around for since about the 60s in the oil and gas industry, predominantly used for hole workovers. So, you know, dangling a string, a steel line down an existing open hole. But has been used more recently in the gas fields. The numbers that I show you up there are from the Alberta gas fields. And these are essentially the reasons that Deep Exploration Technology CRC got into coiled tube drilling about 8 years ago. That is incredible drilling productivity, driven mostly by the fact that you don't have to stop to screw rods together or screw them apart. Big improvements in safety for exactly the same reason. Ability to maintain water flows into the hole, maintain pressure in the hole so that we don't have pulsing in the hole leading to collapse. Very quick in and out of the hole if you do need to change bits. For example, it tends to have, if you're not dealing with the very large rigs that they use for hole workovers, a small footprint, and we have the ability to contain the fluids. So what it promises is high productivity, safe, small environmental footprint, and much reduced costs. The outcome for that, and the reason that our sponsors asked us to get into this, is that it provides the ability to drill more holes. I'm going to do something slightly different in this talk, which is end with the rationale for doing that, which is where we're going right now. But first I'll take you through a bit of a journey of how we got to the coiled tube rig, and I'll show you some of the trials that we did. I hope will convince you that this is useful technology. If we have time, I'll show you a video just to try and convince you that it exists and it's out there. So the key challenges for this for mineral exploration is that we need to penetrate the ground that hasn't been penetrated before. So we need to be able to cut rock in a number of different ways using a technique that you can't lean on very hard because the coil tends to bend and wobble in the hole. So we need high rate of penetration with low weight on bit, the middle one there. The other thing we need is a coil. So how this thing works, and I'll show you this a little bit later on, is the steel, the drill rod is a continuous bit of steel that winds on to a spindle, to well, you can see it in the top of that figure there, to a circular disc that just rotates as you drill and rotates again as you pull out of the hole. Coil durability is a huge part of the economics of this thing, because if you fatigue that steel too quickly and you have to change it too often, it destroys the economics. We had to design this rig from the ground up completely new. That's a big challenge. We have to have a system that can drill through any rocks and can survive fluid loss. One of the most important reasons for that is that we are not collecting core, and in this particular drill rig, we are not, the sample's not coming up the middle of the tube. It's coming up the outside of the hole. So if we lose fluid, we lose our sample. That was a huge issue for us, and sample representativity is the key thing. So our aim was to design a greenfields rig that could drill to 500 metres. This was the aim that was given to us by our sponsors. That would weigh less than 10 tonnes and would be able to drill at a drilling cost, in fact, an all-in drilling cost of $50 a metre. Our aim was to be able to get through large parts of semi-consolidated to unconsolidated cover in Australia. How did we solve coil durability? We tried heaps of things. We tried basically hose line, like a garden hose almost. We tried old coiled tubing. That's our original coiled tube rig, is that Axon rig up on the right there, which came straight from Texas. In the end, we didn't solve the problem of coil durability. It was solved by the development of blue steel, which is that coil on the right, which came along in about 2015, 2016, and solved that problem for us. We can now get about 1,000 trips out of one of these coils, which completely solved that problem. Rate of penetration, we tried lots of different drill bits and bottom hole assemblies in order to do this. Some of the experimental results are up there on your left. What we found was the best way to penetrate the rock in hard rock was by hammering it and breaking it into little chips, sending the sample back up the outside of the drill string as cuttings. We're now getting pretty consistently rates of penetration of about 30 centimetres a minute. We do get a metre a minute occasionally, as those experiments show. The next thing is we need a clean fluid. The downhole hammers and the motors that are downhole get absolutely shredded if you pass dirty fluids through them, even with small amounts of solids in them, ripped apart. So we have solved two problems in one. We use a solids removal unit on the surface. That contains a fluid. In fact, it solves three problems in one. It contains a fluid, it can prepare a sample for us, and it makes clean fluid for passing down and running the downhole instruments. Hole integrity we solved by designing some new materials to go down the borehole, which we trialled. Hopefully this will convince you. This is done in the same site on adjacent holes. This is without our loss inhibitors. On occasion, we're getting 100% fluid loss here. This is with our final solution of loss inhibitors. Even in the worst conditions at very high flow rates, having very little fluid loss. We've now done this, proven this works in trials. And cuttings. So once we've got that fluid loss solved, what we've found is that the material comes out of the hole in time sequence with when it's being drilled, taking into account how long it took to get up the hole. We've designed a new splitting system, which is specifically for splitting the fluid, which the samples carried in. So what we get in this situation is between 3 and 6% solid. The rest is just the drilling fluid coming out of the hole. All this has happened in a really short space of time. So one thing that's really important to know, as you see this technology roll out into the marketplace over the next few years, is just how young it is. You know, we see ourselves competing with a whole range of drilling types that have been around for tens, dozens, or hundreds of years. So this thing was finished. The two prototypes were built at the end of 2016 after going through this process in the last 8 years that I just spoke about. And the trials that I'm about to talk about happened in 2017. And there's an existing trial going on right now in Nevada, which is being managed by Barrick and Imdex. So some results. I think most of the people in this audience are geologists, so I thought I'd better spend some time showing you what the sample looks like and some of the geochemistry from it. Our first field trial was in outback South Australia, near Port Augusta, February, March 2017. We're drilling through about 400 metres of pretty consolidated neoproterozoic, mostly neoproterozoic cover. Our target here was a basalt, which we knew was sitting at that 400 metre level. I show this picture to give you an idea of the footprint. This was our very first run in the field. We're hoping that the footprint when this thing's out and about is about half of that size. What happened in this hole is we utilised, or in fact we didn't in this hole, we did coiled tube drilling right from the top of the hole. We drilled 20 metres and cased it, which is usually what you would do in cover materials. We drilled 367 metres in 4 shifts, 4 12-hour shifts, less setup. Our target there was to drill 400, but 367 was pretty good. This hole was twinned on a diamond hole through the same material. We did that quite specifically to compare the geology in it. And the diamond hole was drilled in 14 and a half, 15 shifts. So we're getting much better penetration rates. It was a stable and very clean borehole, and I'll demonstrate that to you, showing you the chips and the assays. We had better than 98% fluid return from this hole with very little conditioning. This is almost perfect drilling conditions for us. And what we did was we sampled 110 metres of this hole in 3 sections in great detail. What we did is we sampled the entire product. So we sampled the fluid and the cuttings in buckets so that we knew we got the whole particle size distribution, everything. And I'll show you the results of that. The average sampling depth increment there was about 1/3 of a metre. We managed to return chip samples from about 90% of the hole. This hole was quite straight. It kicked at the bottom of the casing, and then it went basically straight with a deviation of 2.6 degrees. Those are the chips from the hole. The sample it's not, the average grain size is not quite RC chips. The biggest grain sizes are about 1/2 centimetre. About half of the material is less than 100 microns. And the rest is, and then there's a bit of a gap. In fact, it's a bimodal particle size distribution. The rest of the material is mostly 1/2 mil or above. You can log it. You can see textures in it. You can see colour changes in it. This is straight off the rig and into the chip trays. And we were able to identify all of the stratigraphy going down. We were able to identify the sulfides that were in the basalt at the bottom of the hole. So it's useful for logging. And it's spectacularly useful for geochemistry. So this is those buckets that I talked about. We're assaying all the solid material in the bucket. We siphoned, we let it settle out for several days, and we siphoned off the water and then dried off the excess water from the end. So this is everything that was in the hole. And you can see this is quite a subtle change in the geology. You can see there's a slight colour change there going from one formation to the other. You can pick it with absolute accuracy at that depth of 224.5 metres in the geochemistry. And it's razor sharp. Here's a better one. This one we did detailed assays on the adjacent core hole. So let me get this right. In red on this diagram is 50 centimetre half core assay from the lab. And in the grey is these averaging out to about 1/3 of a metre assays from the material that came out of the CT drilling. We didn't do any doctoring of that. We just did an algorithm to work out what depth it came from and plotted them next to each other. So there is the contact with the basalt. You can see the top horizon of that basalt is slightly altered at decimetre scale. We're picking that up. You can see that there's about a metre horizon where we saw the visible chalcopyrite, where it's picking up copper at percent levels, and there is no smearing of that signal down the hole. This is coming from a depth of 400 metres. To me, that's, that single diagram is the justification of 8 years of work that we did on this rig. The data are as good as you would get from half-core diamond. We did another field trial encouraged by our sponsors in much tougher conditions. So this was in 140 odd metres of really tough drilling where even air core loses a lot of the holes through running sands, swelling clays and gravels. Our aim here, I'm not going to show you any assays from this hole because our aim wasn't to assay the material. Our aim was to get through the hole, get through the cover material. What we did here is we used one of the design aspects of the rig is that we can drill in conventional mode as well as in coiled tube mode. It's just got a rotary head on the top. So we drilled through 140 metres, and using that capacity, we cased it with HQ, and then we went back with steel, and we went back inside, and we drilled the basement underneath. So what you can see is we took 3 12-hour shifts to get through the 140 odd metres of cover. Then we went back in and drilled another 270 metres in another 3 shifts into the target volcanics at the bottom. We had parts of that hole where we started to drill where we had 100% fluid loss, and we improved that to 5 using the drilling loss inhibitors that we designed. And we managed to get chip samples for all of the basement material. We didn't do great, completely transparent, we didn't do great with chips from the material in the cover because we had to put so much gunk down there to deal with the fluid loss. That hole was really quite straight. It was 10 metres off where we wanted to be at a depth of 425. So we know now we can drill well in the hard stuff, and we can get a sample from it that we want to see. We know that we can effectively punch through the cover in order to get down to that target horizon. All right, a little bit on the rock explorer capability then. It can drill to 250 metres and put casing into 250 metres in conventional mode and to 500 metres in coiled tubing mode. We want to be doing as much coiled tubing drilling as we can because that's where we get the productivity uplift. Again, we're not changing rods. And this rig we haven't tried it on anything different to 60 degrees. Okay, hopefully, can you guys see if those videos will run? There's videos on either of those. If not, I'll explain it. Look, while it's coming on, the most amazing thing about coiled tubing drilling is when you're standing out there on the drill site, nothing happens. Most of you guys would have seen diamond drilling, RC drilling, or possibly even RAB drilling, where the drillers are changing rods regularly, stopping circulation. Oh no, sorry, not that video. Sorry, there were videos embedded in that last slide. My apologies. This rig on your left, all you see is that reel at the top gradually moves around. The rods don't spin. All the action's happening down at the bottom. Nobody's hurting themselves. The worst thing that could happen, in fact, there's nothing that can happen. Even if you reach in and touch the rods going down, all they are is just gradually moving down the hole. Very safe, very boring. The busiest people are the guys who are dosing the fluids. So here's a question. What do you do with a rig like this? So it gets a representative sample at better than meter resolution. There's no smearing. You can do visual logging on it. You can do in-field assay on it, or you can send it to the lab. You can do mineral separates on it. You can see textures in it. What do you do with this thing? So here's what we want to do. So I'm changing now to a new CRC. You heard in the intro that I'm now part of a thing called Minex CRC. One of the things Minex CRC was set up to do was to address the problem that we designed this rig for. And that is to drill a heap of holes in areas where there has been no drilling. Our biggest sponsor is the Australian government. They sponsored us for this problem. Notice that the location of all the mineral deposits in Australia is where there's existing outcrop. Let me show you the brilliant correlation with where we drill and where we find ore deposits. That's the drill holes in Australia. They're coloured up for proximity to the next drill hole. So there's a drill hole within 1 kilometre if it's red, and within 32 if it's blue. Message is all of that mineral wealth in Australia was found in 30% of the area of Australia that we've drilled, and we haven't found anything in the areas that we haven't drilled. So what we need, great geophysics, we need to drill more holes. that's what we're going to do. So we've got $23.5 million of state and federal survey money in Australia, and what we're going to do is go out there and start drilling with this thing. We're going to build up the sort of databases in those areas that haven't been explored before, the sort of databases that you saw generate such value this morning, and in Pim's talk and Dave's talk. We're going to put together more efficient drilling with the sort of technologies to gather data from that drilling with a heap of drilling. This is our size, bit of an ad if you guys want to get involved in MinX CRC, because this doesn't just have to happen in Australia, it can happen anywhere in the world. We have a 10-year life, we have multiple sponsors, we have a big research budget, we can solve problems that your company has, so come and talk to me and try and get involved. Thanks.